This video is part 13 in a series that provides an overview of the National Folklore Archive Initiative, NFAI, and an introduction to the function and content of its Folklore Collections Database, the FCD. Video 13. Importing and Exporting EAD Formatted XML Data. Okay, folks. This is the most technical video in the series, and it's really aimed at users who are already familiar with the Encoded Archival Description Standard, or EAD as it's called for short. For repositories that have EAD encoded finding aids, or who are creating them, the EAD import tool can be a helpful shortcut in getting collection descriptions into the FCD. For repositories that don't have EAD encoded finding aids, you can use the export tool to create them. In this video, we'll go over how one uses the EAD import-export tool in FCD and some of its quirks. I really want to thank Nathan Georgiadis of the University of Oregon and Julia Wong of the University of Wisconsin for testing the tool and providing feedback on its functionality. The EAD import tool draws EAD-formatted XML data into the FCD, mapping FCD data fields and EAD tags. It's pretty straightforward. However, it does do some oddball stuff you should be aware of. In short, it's best not to import a finding aid, delete the imported records, and then re-import the finding aid. This is a broader quirk in the FCD. Sometimes records you create persist even after you figured you've deleted them. The result? Duplicate records. We're working on getting to the bottom of this, but for the time being, just be aware of the problem. The repository name as it appears in the ArcDescript repository corp name tags must be a character-for-character match to the name associated with the FCD record for the repository. If it isn't, you'll have to manually associate the collection with the repository in FCD. Data contained in the EADID URL equals tag will not import into the finding aid URL data field. If you have an online finding aid URL, you will need to enter this manually into FCD. While LCSH terms identified with subject source LCSH import just fine, terms associated with subject source equals AFSET will not import and need to be entered manually. When you export records that have ET subject terms associated with them, in the subject source tag for those terms, the source is identified as ET2. Perhaps using ET2 makes a difference. We're not sure yet. We're trying to get to the bottom of it. Data recorded in the finding aid as finding aid status equals completed will be set to new upon import. You'll need to change this manually in FCD. FCD doesn't like finding aids with really complex hierarchies. For example, one with subseries of subseries. It's apparently a configuration issue, and it's something that's on our list to take care of. Those are the documented quirks for now. We'll update this list periodically. Okay, let's go over importing. First, log in to the FCD administrative backend using your username and password. The EAD import-export tool lives behind the NFAI menu. Here's the import screen. Click Browse and browse to the file. Here's the sample XML file. Select Open, and then Start Import. That's basically it. Now let's take a look at how the record imported. Okay, so here's the imported collection. Pretty straightforward. Let's move on to exporting. So why have an EAD export function? A big part of the motivation behind NFAI and the FCD is to provide access to standard descriptive tools for repositories of folklore archives that do not currently have access to them. The EAD export tool gives repositories that do not have EAD encoded archival descriptions the opportunity to generate them from the data they've entered into FCD. Pretty cool, huh? To use the export function, you go to the NFAI menu and select Export. The two things you can do here: do an EAD encoded XML dump of the entire contents of FCD, or do an EAD encoded XML export of a specific collection in the FCD database. To export a single collection, use the search function here. I'm going to do a search for a fictitious repository, the Miskatonic University Library Special Collections, and see what comes up. There's the Albert Wilmarth collection. You'll note the NFAI identifier there, right? So hit download, and you'll notice that the file, the XML file, is named after the NFAI identifier. There it is, and download. So next we'll take a look at the XML itself. Here we've opened up the exported XML file using Oxygen XML Editor 15.1. Overall, it looks pretty good. Careful review will show these C data statements embedded in the code. These are the result of the way CA does certain character encoding. There's the apostrophe right there that XML just doesn't like. So this is a minor hassle. You can correct it, mostly by getting rid of it and then clearing out the C data statement. You'll notice down there it's demonstrating that it's showing there's an error. But once we clean up all the extraneous code, it's clean. Okay, the other thing I'd like to point out is in the subject source tag. Here it says ET2. AFSET is technically the proper designation for that source. These were entered into FCD manually. The ethnographic thesaurus was selected as the source, and Collective Access assigned it ET2 as the designator. So we're thinking this may be part of the problem with importing records where the subject source is set to AFSET. So that's the skinny on importing and exporting EAD from the Folklore Collections database. We'll be updating this video as we discover more quirks and resolve some of the already identified ones, so be sure to tune back in from time to time. And this brings us to an end of the FCD video series. Thanks a lot.